State, Matt Campbell, last year solid as a rock. This year expectations are good. We just talked to Sam Kahn, athletic.com, and about their margins are slim, but man, they're razor sharp at the same time with Matt Campbell. We're joined by Travis Hines, Des Moines Register, covers Iowa State, the Cyclones. Travis, thanks for your time with Craig and Paul. Smokey with you as well. So is that just, it's always going to be that way, always has been that way, that if Iowa State wins, it's going to be razor thin, that their margins of errors are not going to be like they could just walk in and know they can beat somebody?
I would guess it'll always be that way, only because I think Matt Campbell does that by design in terms of the way he puts together his rosters, the way that they game plan, and the way that they strategize. They're very conservative. They're very run first, defense first. You know, they're very much almost a similar vein to the school that is very much a rival, a couple hundred miles to the east in Iowa City, with what Kirk Ferentz and Iowa have built over there. So I think there is a way to do that, but there is a flip side that you're putting yourself in a lot of coin flip situations, and sometimes that goes for you and sometimes that goes against you. So for Iowa State, it does seem that by design they're happy to play ball control, low possession games, and that's worked out well for them at times in the past. And then there's times where they lose the majority of those games and you have a 3-9 season like they had 2 years ago. But when you win those games, you have that 2020 season where you're Fiesta Bowl champion. So again, like, it does seem like a high wire act for them, but if there were a year that they were going to break that mold, it wouldn't shock me if it's this year with what they have in terms of, or what we think they have in terms of firepower offensively.
Travis, is this, you know, when they had Brock Purdy and Breece Hall and that kind of group, they had a group that kind of grew up together a little bit. But even still, numbers-wise, this appears to be a group that's kind of almost all exactly in the same class or two, developing through the system together. Some synergy I don't know if they've ever really had before. Am I wrong on that?
They had it to a degree because of that group that you mentioned, or they have it now because of that group that you mentioned, where you had Brock Purdy, you had Breece Hall, you had Mike Rose, and you had a lot of guys that played for a sixth and seventh year because of COVID, where Iowa State got really old in 2020, in 2021, and then you saw where they really had to flip the roster, or at least the two deep, in 22 and 23, and last year some of that was because of the gambling probe. But it is really a young group of a lot of guys that had got to campus at relatively the same time and are all now kind of following that same growth trajectory. And the other thing that Iowa State has that's allowed this to happen organically over the last couple of years is that they've been able to keep their own players. You know, they haven't really been hit overly hard by the transfer portal in terms of defections, and that's allowed them to keep this core of guys that have been on campus now for 2 or 3 years, to where it really, this feels, in terms of trajectory, you don't want to, you know, put out too much given the guys that you mentioned are all now NFL stars, but it does feel in terms of the growth trajectory that this group is very much on the same path as that group in terms of growing together and going from, you know, close to rock bottom to improvement to even higher expectations in the 2024 season.
Travis, you mentioned the gambling probe, and that was something that at the time seemed like such a major deal, and it obviously was for Iowa and Iowa State in particular. But, I mean, where are we even with that? I know months ago the update was now the athletes are suing the investigators. Am I correct there? And just kind of how, you know, that just went away basically after the initial announcement everywhere, probably except for Iowa. But what was kind of the resolution, and how have they moved on from that?
Yeah, it certainly hasn't been completely found a resolution, because there are lots of claims, both from the outside and frankly from within law enforcement, that we've seen in depositions, that this probe, that there may have been irregularities, I guess would be the gentle way of putting it, of how this data was collected and how this investigation was unfolded, and whether there should have been warrants when there were not, and whether the players and participants in this investigation were misled or not. And all of that is going to unfold probably in depositions and in courtrooms across Iowa over the next few weeks, months, and potentially even years. But certainly it has been a huge controversy here, not only because, you know, as best we can tell, like, a lot of these guys did gamble. There were people that pled guilty to gambling underage, for gambling on their own team, for gambling on their own sports. So it appears that at least some of these players did what they were not supposed to do. The question now is for law enforcement and for the courts is, was the investigation done in an appropriate way?
Yeah, and, considering it, like initially when you hear that, you're like, oh, my God, and this is going to be bad. And both teams, I mean, Iowa was good, and obviously Iowa State was better than a lot of people thought. And are you surprised they were able to get through that without too much just, like, chaos?
Certainly. I mean, they lost their starting backfield of their quarterback and their running back. They lost their starting tight end, their offensive lineman. So, again, like what they were able to do last year was really impressive and certainly a testament to what Matt Campbell has built in terms of the culture at Iowa State.
Travis Hines with us, Des Moines Register on 365 Sports Cover in Iowa State.
Travis, Rocco Becht how would you categorize him? Is he savvy now as a second-year player? Is he crafty? What kind of quarterback, what adjectives do you use with him?
He's very steady. He's very accurate. I think, the big thing for him has been steady growth. I mean, when he was a true freshman, he fell behind a walk-on the depth chart for probably the first 6 or 8 games of the season before ascending to that number 2 spot, where even last year he was splitting time with a true freshman for the first game of the season. And you saw the offense, really hit rock bottom in week 3 against Ohio, and they only got better from there. So I think growth has been his biggest advantage as a starting quarterback.
I like to ask the hard-hitting question. So what are your thoughts on the new uniforms? I know Nike's had a little bit of a copy and paste, as we've seen with all of the rollouts, a lot of similarities between Baylor, Iowa State, various others that have been debuted. But what do you think about the Cyclones look in particular?
I don't have strong feelings about it. I'm not a huge uniform guy, but okay. I do know that Iowa State fans have been really receptive of them. I think they've been wanting the stripes on the sleeves for a long time. The biggest thing that Iowa State has done in terms of their uniforms in recent years, beyond the black jerseys, which have been strangely controversial in these parts, is the Jack Trice throwbacks that they wore last year in commemoration of the 100-year anniversary of Jack Trice, who was the first black athlete at Iowa State, and his death after injuries sustained in a football game in 1923, that they wore jerseys commemorating that. And those have been a huge hit. And I would imagine they're in the new college football video game. And I would imagine those become a staple year in and year out for Iowa State, just because of not only do they look good, but the symbolism of them and the commemoration of them are really important to the football program and to the university and to the community.
So I just noticed this. I guess it was a couple of days ago, the Des Moines Register, the sports department, you are now the Cyclones columnist. I know you've covered Iowa State over the years. That's just like in the last couple of days. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It's big shoes to fill for my friend and former colleague, Randy Peterson, who was with the Register for 52 straight years, the only job he ever had. Obviously a legend at the Register and in Iowa. So it's a big responsibility and a big opportunity that I'm really grateful and excited to get.
Well, now you have to get grizzled, though, like Randy.
Yeah.
I mean, we loved having Randy, but you got to get that grizzled old sports writer in you pretty fast. I mean, I know you're a young guy, Travis, but you got to start, complaining about press box food, things like that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I now have 3 kids, 5 and under, so I got a feeling the grizzled is going to come fast from just simply lack of sleep and agitation.
Yeah, Randy was back when sports writers would start working on their columns or post-game, whatever, and they'd have some old food from the press box and maybe even a beer. I don't know about in the college press box, but yeah, he was great. We had him on many, many times. I'm glad he had such a great chance to get away and enjoy retirement. Travis, if you look at who are your 2 1 through 4, and we'll let you go. I know you got to go with the kids in the weekend. And who are your 1 through 4 picks in the Big 12 preseason poll?
Oh, man, I haven't even really looked at it that closely. I mean, I think Utah is clearly the number 1, but I really don't start diving in here until we get to media days. And we were in Las Vegas a few weeks ago for doing for the Big 12 media days, but I really don't, just because of the nature of the beast, don't really dive in terms of understanding the Big 12 until this time of year. But I mean, I think it's Utah. When you look 1 through 16, I think the middle is going to be really fascinating to watch because there's so many equally matched teams, and with the unbalanced schedule that we haven't seen in the league very much or for very long, like, to me, that'll be the really interesting thing. And I think it'll be a thing we're talking about a lot as we get into late October and November, is just the schedules. Because you look at Iowa State, I mean, they could get to the last couple of weeks of the season when they play Utah and Kansas State, with probably 2 losses and very much in the thick of things in the Big 12, because, what on paper looks to be a pretty advantageous schedule. I think that'll be a huge piece of this puzzle that we're all talking about the last month of the season or so.
What's more exciting, Iowa State football with Matt Campbell, or what we have with TJ and the men's basketball program?
Man, I think Iowa State fans are looking at a very exciting fall and winter. I mean, I think people are really excited about what Campbell's got coming back for football this season. But then you look over to basketball and you have a top 10 team with a homegrown star in Ames' own Taman Lipsey. You've got 3 guys coming back in the backcourt. You've got Milan Momcilovic, who I think is probably going to be a first-round NBA pick next year. I think and Iowa State, as much like it is, they love football. Football's number one. But when you compare, the fervor about basketball from Iowa State to other universities around the country, like, this is a program that the fan base gets absolutely batty about. And so I think basketball has a chance to really throw things into hyperdrive, but I don't think anybody's wishing away football season by any sense.
The Hilton Coliseum, I've experienced it, is just phenomenal. What is the timeline of the Cyclone? Somebody just asked me in the chat room if I'd get an update from you.
Yeah, it's still a few years away. I mean, they're doing it in phases. The last I was up there, they were still moving dirt and doing the infrastructure, but they've already announced the lead tenant, which is a medical facility, which they felt like they needed to get something in there that would be bringing people 365 days a year, because they're only getting 7 football Saturdays and only a handful of home games for basketball that are really going to drive people there, especially in the winter in Ames, Iowa. But, it's still a few years away, and I imagine with a project of this size, there's going to be plenty of ebbs and flows from beginning to end. But as far as I know, they remain on schedule to get to the finish line of that.
Thank you, Travis. Enjoy the weekend. Travis Hines, Des Moines Register, Iowa State lead columnist now to cover the Cyclones. As he mentioned, Randy Peterson there, 52 years. Sam Kahn, not only